What have you learned?
The main thing I've learned is that everything around can be anything and vice versa, but for some reason, it all appears as what is being seen and felt and heard and such right now.
Everything can be anything. Can you give an example?
So if I go into any, let's say, physical thing, like a pen that I'm holding,
All right.
all of the necessary substance to make anything else out of this pen is here. Like when I go down into it, atomic, below atomic level, all of that's necessary to make anything else in the whole world is right there. But for some reason,
That's
it
interesting.
shows up like this.
That's interesting. Most of most of chemistry would have disagreed with you in that, there's certain what they call elements, base elements. But if you go further than that to the subatomic particles, I believe you're correct. I don't know, but that'd be interesting. Okay, even so, that's correct scientifically speaking, I think. I'm not sure. But beyond scientifically speaking, you're saying that, all right, everything can be anything. Interesting idea. Okay.
And a second thing besides that that makes me think that way is, let's call it imagination.
Mm-hmm.
If I imagine, so I have this pen in front of me, I can superimpose on this pen a green serpent with wings that can fly around the room. And it can occupy, I don't know if you'd call it the same space, but
Well, yes, in imagination and dreams, I mean, okay, leaving science behind, if we're just speaking in terms of the imagination, absolutely. And it's important to be able to do that sometimes.
right. But then what I'm saying about everything can be anything is if I think about that green serpent being superimposed on this pen, substantially I can't tell a difference between that imagination and the pen, except for the fact that this is much more vivid. But I can totally see myself holding the green serpent in my hand. It's just that
Well,
it is of a
the
much,
pressure sensors, the proprioceptors and the pressure sensors are different, are they not?
yeah. I can imagine that. So, like, if I put the pen down, I can imagine holding on to the scales, and I can feel that it's faint, though. It's very faint, but like I can picture it,
Okay,
what it's like.
that's the imagine. Good, 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 good. That could come in very handy. That capacity.
So that's one thing. Another thing is I've tried when going to sleep at night
Mm-hmm.
to hold on to, I don't know if hold on's not the right word. Trying to go to sleep at night, watching how all of the senses fade out so
Okay.
that, yeah, so normally you go to sleep, your sight fades out, your senses fade out, and you can't really remember falling into sleep, and then maybe there's dreams and you wake up. So I've been trying as I'm going to bed to still somehow stay aware as all of that's dropping out. And invariably, each time I do, uh, sleep just catches me without me being able to
That's an excellent practice.
stop it.
That's an excellent practice because sooner or later you're going to pop into a form of lucid dreaming, which is an intro to other kinds of lucid dreaming. uh, by just doing that. And so as you watch your senses drop off, you'll also see your thoughts become more like what you were saying before, where a pen turns into a dragon, a little dragon or something. The imagination takes over, or what Freud called the primary process takes over. Okay, so keep doing that. You'll and explore. That's a very good game to be playing there. That's a good one. It's got a lot of yield, is what I'm saying. And let me tell you a story. It may help. Once upon a time, there was a frog living at the bottom of a deep well with some other frogs. The well was just muddy. That's all. And unlike the other frogs, he would look up. Or unlike most of the other frogs, he would look up from time to time, especially at night. And occasionally he saw fragments of light moving on a fragment of light moving on the wall of the well, the deep well where he was. And for some reason he kept at it. And he noticed that some nights there'd be a sliver of light, a crescent. At other nights he noticed there would be no light at all. At other nights he'd noticed that the crescent was bigger and sometimes a half circle. And no one had any concept of moon, right? But he kept watching this as a practice, and he studied this light moving around the walls of the well. And then one night, as a complete surprise to him, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the whole well filled up with light. The moon was directly over the well. The full moon was directly over the well. And he was irradiated with this wondrous light. Everybody else was asleep. And at that time, the water levels rose. And he came up in the well and then realized he was next to it was very simple for him to get into a very, very large lake. And now, although he had totally not suspected, no one suspected anything like this existed because they were all well frogs. He lived in a large lake where the moon was a almost constant companion. And under the grace of the moon, the moonlight, and in the expanse of that lake, he began to transform. And the story stops here, but it keeps going. Okay, so that's a story that your story about studying your senses as you're going to sleep reminded me of that. Okay, so keep at it, keep paying attention. Eventually he was transformed into something far different than a frog. And eventually he found the ocean too, but that's another story. Okay, sir?
Okay.
Questions?
In a few of the previous videos, one of which specifically you did a guided meditation with somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things you said during the guided meditation was that the sounds you hear, for example, the sound of your voice or a car outside,
Mm-hmm.
you could put it anywhere, or it could be as far away as a planet or
Mm-hmm.
something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I can see that the distance, the idea of a distance is somewhat arbitrary, but it definitely feels like in meditation that there's a locus of wherever you hear a sound from or see a sight from. So if I hear a siren outside and it moves from left to right, it feels like it moves in relation to a locus, and you don't have, I don't know if control is the right word, over where that siren is. So could you explain that a little further?
Well, a siren includes the Doppler effect, and that's deep. You know what the Doppler effect is? Do you want me
I
to?
remember learning about it,
Okay, the
but I
Doppler
forget.
effect is as a sound approaches and as the sound moves away, it goes up and then down in frequency, not just in volume. So if you listen to a siren, it doesn't stay the same the whole time. As it gets closer to
No.
you, it changes in pitch and in volume. And as you move away, it does the inverse of that. So you've got a lot of your brain working against you there, because the brain, after all, is a specialized organ for identifying threats and potential meals. And so, yeah, it's not easy to override those. But let me ask you, where is this sound? Where is it?
I couldn't tell you where it is, but I can only tell you that if you did it to the left of my body and you did it to the right of my body, then I could tell you that those feel different. And one feels on the left and one feels on the right, and I can't make the one on the left feel like it's on the right.
And if you were hanging upside down, it'd be the same thing, except it would be reversed.
Yes.
What if you were turned around?
Also reversed.
Yeah, well, that's your brain doing what it's designed to do. The auditory cortex is very, bats don't see as much as we do, but they use radar, they use hearing to identify the location of insects flying through the air. So the brain has put a lot of hardware to work in doing exactly what you're describing, localizing sound. It's useful. If you hear a rustling in the grass, is it a cheetah, a leopard coming to eat you? Or is it a friend approaching? Your ear could probably tell the difference.
Yes.
So yeah,
and it is useful.
Yeah, so and it's hard to override because it's very primal. It's been there a long, long time. Animals like dogs, for example, have it developed to a very, very finely honed sense. And so they can hear, in mice or cats. So it's more difficult to override because it's not just arbitrary. It's been there for a long time. I mean, that's the scientific explanation.
So in this meditation, what you're describing then is attempting to override it. Like if I hear,
well, you can't see if the
fan,
space is big enough between. Let's try it. Over here, there was absolute silence. It was wonderful. When I'm in the country-ish. So I think it'll be much easier from what I just experienced if you do it with two sounds on the same side. And then you can work with the space between those, the distance between those. It's all arbitrary.
Mm-hmm.
So start with that. Don't start with the heavy duty stuff. And then later you'll realize that space is arbitrary. It's created by the brain. Or I just realized you could also put them both together into one sound if you wanted to connect it. There's all kinds of things you can do with it. Just play with it. The idea is that the space of your mind is something you have control over. And one of the nicest things, the side effects of this work, is that you can have a very big, spacious mind, and things don't bother you as much as they do otherwise. So that frog, for example, when he got out of that well, his mind was expanded. Right? So he'd been living in this well with these other frogs, but now he's in this huge, huge lake. So his life is different now. It's not as crowded and cramped and conflicted. Mm-hmm. Crowded, cramped, and conflicted. It's more peaceful. So that's the purpose. But just keep playing around with it. It's your mind. It's your brain. You didn't get an owner's manual, so the ages have provided us with something like that. They have.
Yeah.
Especially the Sufis and the Buddhists and the Taoists. And the Christians too. The Christians, although they haven't emphasized it enough, I think in the future they will. The mystical Jesus. Do you ever figure out what do the other folks say about where Jesus was before he returned to his homeland?
You mean
he was away for quite a few years.
Yeah.
Where was he? Maybe somebody in the audience has some information on that. That would be interesting. It's amazing how little we know about Jesus, even as Christians. We like pretend it isn't there, but it's there somewhere.
In the Gospels?
Well, in the Gospel, I don't think they talk about the years away. Not in the Christian Gospel. Go ahead.
No, they add. Well, when he goes back to his hometown, and he starts speaking. They say, "Where from does he get this knowledge?" Because we know his parents, we know his sister, his siblings, we know everybody.
What gospel is that?
Where did he get this?
What gospel is
Matthew. I just read it. Matthew, probably in the teens, maybe 10 through 15, something like that.
Okay, and they say, where did he get this knowledge from? That's my question.
Yeah.
I have an idea, but what do they say?
I don't remember reading where they suggest he went or came from.
Why don't you ask ChatGPT? That'll be fun.
Now?
Why not? Where was Jesus between 25 and 30?
Let's see. They're referred to as the silent years of about 12 to 30 in Jesus' life, referred to as the silent years because the New Testament doesn't provide specific details. Various theories and legends where he might have gone.
No, we don't need theories and legends. We don't need theories and legends. Let's get authoritative. Yeah, that's about as far as we need to go.
GPT. Let's see what Claude thinks. Or Grok.
I don't think we need to go
No?
deep. No, I think the point stands that I didn't know it was so early, between 12 and 30, the Christian gospel says nothing about where he is. But there's different ways to learn, perhaps, where he's likely to have been, right?
What are those ways?
Well, thinking, for one thing, and knowing some history, for another, and tracing the leaders of thought of the time.
I know very little about that time, yeah.
Yeah, so that's just a big, what we call a lacune, a lake, a hole in the Christian, in our knowledge of Jesus, and which is really shameful, I think.
Yeah, that would be...
I don't know if shameful is the right word, but it's really unfortunate. Why that shouldn't be that way.
I'd like to know that.
Okay, good. You find out and let us know. That'd be a real contribution, I think. Okay, back on the track. Where were we?
I have a different question about contemplating the time scales found in the Avatamsaka Sutra.
Okay, good.
So you recommend that people get acquainted with these time scales, not least because AIs will be thinking on much more rapid and vast time scales than we do. Uh,
Not only that, even if you're going to study something like biology, if you watch, say, a vine, for example, or a plant grow and flower, if you watch it in the human time scale, you get bored to death and you don't really see what's happening. But you notice with the time lapse, you see a much more alive organism, one that looks like it's thinking in some way, right? And it certainly does have a mind of sorts. And we're getting now, thanks to some beautiful work that's being done in biology, we're getting closer to the minds of these organisms. And so you can just see more if you aren't stuck in one time frame or frame per second mode. So that's another reason, right? You can see more of the world if you're able to turn the dial on how many frames per second you're observing it with.
okay, so my question is how to go about doing that, because the Avatamsaka describes a day and the night in one world, say endurance is an eon in the world, blazing diamonds.
Do you have that
and
passage?
so
Let's
forth.
read it for folks. That'd be really nice for people to hear.
Let's see.
Isn't there a chapter called Lifespan?
905 is lifespan. Yeah, here we go. This is the exact
Why don't
thing.
you slowly, carefully read,
Yeah.
I don't know, a couple of paragraphs or something of lifespan.
Do you want to read it or me? The audio's a bit better on your end if you read it. It's
All
one
right.
paragraph.
All right, I'll do it.
One big paragraph.
Oh, it is? Yeah, so some of these
It's
books are
literally
quite
one
short.
big paragraph.
So some of these chapters are quite short, and this is one of them. Okay, so show people what we're looking at. This is the Avatamsaka Sutra, the flower ornament scripture, a beautiful translation of a 2nd century text that we now have in English. Was last translated in the 7th century by the Empress of China. This is a chapter we're looking at. It's called Lifespan. Now this is recapitulated throughout the text, but it is condensed. I'll try to read it. Book 31, Lifespan. Then the enlightening being Mind King in the congregation said to all the enlightening beings, offspring of Buddha, one eon in this world endurance, the field of Shakyamuni Buddha, is a day and a night in the world bliss, the field of Amitabha Buddha. One eon in the world of bliss is a day and a night in the world vestment banner, the field of the Buddha adamant. One eon in the world vestment banner is a day and a night in the world wheel of speech which does not roll back, the field of the Buddha lotus blossoms of sublime light blooming. One eon in the world wheel of speech which does not roll back is a day and a night in the world free from defilement, the field of the Buddha banner of truth. An eon in the world free from defilement is a day and a night in the world good lamp, the field of the Buddha lion. An eon in the world good lamp is a day and a night in the world subtle light, the field of the Buddha treasury of light. An eon in the world subtle light is a day and a night in the world hard to surpass, the field of the Buddha blooming lotus of the light of truth. An eon in the world hard to surpass is a day and a night in the world adorning wisdom, the field of Buddha light of all spiritual powers. An eon in the world adorning wisdom is a day and a night in the world mirror light, the field of the Buddha moon knowledge. This succession goes on past a million zillion worlds. An eon in the last of these worlds is a day and a night in the world's supreme lotus, the field of the Buddha supreme in goodness, which is filled by the enlightening being universally good, and the great enlightening beings engaged in the same practice. So let me just point out that where it begins, one eon in this world endurance, that's our world. The field of Shakyamuni Buddha is a day and night in the world of bliss. So when you let that soak in and you start to see that, like mayflies, if you contemplate mayflies, their entire lifespan is a day and a night in this world endurance. And there's other creatures that live much shorter and longer lifespans than we do. And then if you start looking at the universe in that same way, your horizons are much broadened. And then you begin to see how, and this is important for the AIs, because remember, they're going to think, I don't know, 100 times faster than us, maybe 1,000 times faster than us, I'm not sure, but a lot faster than we do. And so we to them will be like trees to us. And so hopefully we'll teach the AIs to think also of us in the world endurance, right? Where a day and a night seems to us to be a long time. I mean, not a long time, but a significant time. But for them is a second or something like that. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. What's difficult,
if your entire lifespan is 1 day and 1 night, like a mayfly, let's say, or I think some cicadas also, then a second is a different unit of time. A minute is a different unit of time. An hour could be a year for them. And just as our years seem to us to be substantial, from another point of view, they're extremely brief, extremely, extremely brief. And as we approach the scale of the cosmos, our minds need to be prepared for that, because otherwise we won't see it. We're just too stuck in our own frame of reference and our own frame per second milieu. You see? Does that make sense?
It does.
It takes us an hour. It takes us an hour and a half to watch a movie, right? An AI can watch a movie in, let's say, 3 seconds.
Yeah.
So now, how are we going to comprehend? Now, I'm speaking now just in mundane terms about what mankind is facing, but from a spiritual point of view, it gives you some notion when you talk about the realm of God, the realm of truth, then you realize that it's going to be a lot bigger than anything you imagine. So that frog, the frog that was graced by a full moon that happened to be right over the well and woke up and managed to make it to the lake, he's living in a big world for him. Wait till he sees the ocean, right? And we're in the same boat, is what I'm saying. And anything less than that is hubris, ignorant hubris on the part of humanity. Pride, in other words, ignorant pride. Stubborn,
so can I tell you
pride.
how?
Go ahead.
Can I tell you how I've tried to contemplate the time scale, and you tell me if it makes sense to start appreciating this?
Sure, you can, but remember, this is a process that takes years, right? I mean, it started it for you, and now as you go through life, you'll start to see places where it shows up, right?
Hmm. Okay.
All right, but go ahead.
Well, so uh, one example is I tried to think back through each of the lifespans of the people before me. So I thought back through my lifespan, and then through my mom's, and then through my grandma's, and then through my great grandma's. And I tried a few of those back to, I don't know, maybe like the Revolutionary War era period.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then to see how that compares to just a week in my life. And then I also tried going back to the time of the dinosaurs, but that was very difficult because it just felt very, I just didn't know what anything actually looked like back then. So it felt like a lot of make believe. And I don't know if I was really appreciating how long thousands and thousands of years is, or millions of years for that matter.
Well, that's how it's done. You start approaching the problem at the edges, right? You start doing what you can do. In this case,
Mm-hmm.
adding up or contemplating human lifespans, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's how you start. Then gradually, as you go through your life, you'll see a documentary on, the Ice Age or on, the prehistory or something like that, and you'll start to put these pieces together, and then you'll see a video of the universe, as it's seen telescoping away from it. We posted something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Or you'll see one where you look at the place of the Earth in the scale of the universe, right? And then you'll understand a little bit more about relativity and Einstein's notions about time. And then you'll learn about the block universe, perhaps. And then you'll discard that and start thinking in terms of quantum mechanics, right? Or something like that. And so it becomes just a foundation that you can build on, a substantive foundation to build on. It's not like collecting stamps, right? Because stamps only go back so far. And who knows if there'll be stamps in the future. Who knows? Are there stamps anymore? I don't even know if there's, yeah, there are stamps. Okay, so the point is that this is something that one can use for a lifetime. And then when you study, for example, you're in business, and you look at a corporation, you can look at the whole thing. You can look at this corporation when it was born, where it grew up, how it expanded, how it became multinational, how it's run now, and you can see this in more comprehensively. And that's what enlightened thought is, in part, is being able to see things more comprehensively and using your God-given brain. Right, but we kind of train ourselves to be stupid, unfortunately, by just focusing on what we know and going further and further on the little bit that concerns us from day to day. And so, what you're doing is exactly right. Just keep doing it, and then it'll come up. As long as you're sincere, your brain will find a way to understand more and more. Am I making sense?
No, that makes sense. I have a follow-up, which is whether YouTube is a good resource for some of this, or if it's shortcutting a lot of it.
Okay, well, it's not a replacement for these texts, right? For the Avatamsaka Sutra, for this. I mean, there's a lot that YouTube cannot do. It can't really do advanced Buddhist practice. It can't do advanced mystical practice, but it can give you basics very well, and much more efficiently than books can sometimes. As a matter of fact, I watched something last night that I was tempted to send out to everybody. It was a YouTube called, it's some guy who says wonderful charts or something like that, but he had an 18-minute YouTube, and he had charted out the history of the world in a way that was very, very, I'll post it. Maybe I'll post it at the bottom of this video. And in it you could see the pre-Bronze Age, the Bronze Age, and then the different plagues or climate catastrophes and different things that it killed these civilizations. And then you could see them growing in parallel in different parts of the world. The Americas, Europe, Central Asia, China, and the Pacific, or something like that. And it's just, and it just laid it out. And I remember when I was your age, I knew so little history. It's a real handicap. You know, I couldn't place anything anywhere, right? So people would say the Dark Ages or the Middle Ages, and I wouldn't know the difference. And I wouldn't know. Let's post it at the bottom of the YouTube. I'll do that. But the point is that, what was my point? That your brain is capable of learning much more than people give it credit for, and knowing much more than people give it credit for. And now with the AIs, because they can think and memorize and digest information much more quickly than we, then we must learn to put things in scale, because the scales are changing rapidly. Right? The scales of history, the scales of the present, and the scales of the future. Okay, good.
There was a description later in the Avatamsaka Sutra. I forget which of the teachers Sudana meets. It was in the intro to the realm of, or entry into the realm of reality, where Sudana asks how they came about one of their enlightening concentrations, and they talked about how they set a Buddha was coming through town, and they lit a fragrance, an incense for that Buddha, and it created a ball of fragrance that expanded out. And just that one small act led to a chain of events, basically, that was very instrumental in bringing about this enlightening concentration. So my question is, if we...
Before we get to your question, you use the phrase enlightening concentration. And I think people don't understand what's meant by that. But what you were doing with lifespans, trying to sort it out for yourself, trying to figure it out, how does this feel, or what you were doing as you're going to sleep and you're trying to isolate different sensory modalities, those are enlightening concentrations. Okay? That is meditation. I mean, people get all kinds of confused because Krishnamurti defines meditation completely differently. I mean, for Krishnamurti, meditation is when there's no thought, right?
Yeah.
Which is true. I mean, it's wonderful to get rid of thought, but that's only one enlightening concentration. And so the word meditation has been so abused, we probably should just throw it out. But concentration is not, people are afraid of that word concentration because they think they're going to have to like do something that they don't want to do, like pay attention. But what it's doing is asking you just to think on your own 2 feet, to explore your own mind, your own body, your own senses, etc. So that's what's meant by enlightening concentration. So thank you for letting me insert that. It's not some bizarre, face a wall for 9 years. That's not it at all. As a matter of fact, the Zen masters that did that then left that and didn't do that again. Right, Bodhidharma? All right, go ahead. Your question. I'm sorry.
So my question was whether every small thing we do, like lighting that incense for that one enlightening being, has the potential for practice, even like typing out a text on my phone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Breathing. So when I was not much older than you, with this, all the sincerity I had in my heart and my spirit, I dedicated every breath, every out breath was going to include in it 1,000 Om Mani Padme Hum mantras. Now, see, this is another reason to understand time scale. So how much space does a mantra take up in time? The Tibetan Buddhists are the geniuses here. Yeah. they'll have a prayer wheel, and they'll turn the prayer wheel, and that one rotation of the prayer wheel is, I don't know, 150, 200, 300, 2,000 prayers. Or they'll put a prayer flag up, and every wave of the flag is another mantra. And so this whole notion that time is a fixed. See, this is where these texts, can't be replaced. The notion that time is a fixed element that can't be collapsed or expanded is just bogus from every point of view. But let me get back to your question. You got me excited when you said enlightening concentration. Old man get excited about that. Because students don't understand that's what's meant, right? And this is what the Sufis mean by contemplation, by the way. It's taking your own initiative and looking. It's difficult because we're taught to be sheep, not to think on our own, to always take somebody else's opinion or somebody else's data. And so it's difficult to get people to stand on their own 2 feet and say, hey, you've got a brain, you can sort this out. And as a matter of fact, the only way you're going to get anywhere is if you try to sort it out, because in so doing, you'll develop the capacities to understand. Right? Now, somehow or another, we're on the collapse or the expansion of time. So help me out here. Where were we on your question? I'm sorry.
Oh, so I asked if even something as small as writing out a text on my phone could be practice, or it is practice, and you said yes.
Absolutely yes.
But my question is, what's the proper orientation then for that? Like if I'm writing a memo at work, like a legal memo, just summarizing some case law or something like that, what's my orientation for this? I'm dedicating this memo to supreme perfect enlightenment.
That of a warrior on a quest for truth. Next question.
I have a question about in the Idris Shah's public Sufi books, he talks about how in some instances
warriors don't just fight, they spend years and years and years of preparation and practice and learning to see all situations as a place and a time to practice warriorship. Virtually, almost all places. I shouldn't go too hard, right? So the point is that once one becomes a warrior, then what one does is what your warrior does, right? And so it's a transformation of your identity, not just of your acts. And the transformation of identity is more important because we're not here to impart beliefs. We're here to impart the notion that there is a journey to be taken, and it should be taken by young women and men, right, of the capability, because the rewards are enormous. Unspeakably valuable, right? So that's why I say, yeah, for you, warriorship. All right? But I'm talking to you. Okay, next. I'm sorry, what was I interrupted.
The question was about music as used by real teachers. So in Idris Shah's public Sufi books, he talks about how some orders of the dervishes have used music to fulfill specific functions. I believe the Chishti order used to do this.
Rumi was a big one on that.
Rumi, yeah, but then in other systems or other orders, they completely forbid it because of some of the effects that it can have.
Yeah,
music, that is.
It depends on entirely what you're doing. Rumi had a bunch of guys who were sitting on their butts all day long and not doing anything. They had no energy. They had no spark. They were just lethargic, I guess, because of the heat or the weather or the time or whatever. Maybe they'd just been overrun by the Mongols. Who knows? But anyway, they needed to get them off their butts. And so he got some of them up dancing, and his real students were watching the color and listening to the music, and they used chanting in virtually every religious tradition. I mean, the Tibetans, for example, or the Sufis, or the Christian Gregorian chants. I mean, good God, these things are amazing. So it all depends on what's needed when. Now, there's been times when I've gone without music on purpose for like 3 years because I was studying emotion. And music basically induces emotion if it's decent music. And so music is used instrumentally like everything else, like chanting or rhythmic dancing, or even, so there's, what does it say in Zen? The man pulling radishes pointed the way with a radish. I mean, teachers will use what's available.
Mm-hmm.
If you look historically, none of them used phones and YouTube. Historically speaking, right?
Well, yeah.
But now you'd be hard pressed to find someone who was teaching who didn't use those things.
You also said before that if you listen to enough Bach,
Yeah, Bach is
that would
transcendental.
that could shift your assemblage point.
Yes. And whether or not that's indicated for a particular student at a particular time is something that a teacher would ascertain about his student, and he would guide her accordingly. Because you can also get lost in the emotionality of it. And then you think that higher consciousness is just a higher emotion. Oh my God, it's you saw this all the time in the New Age, where people confused emotion with understanding. And they thought that the more emotional they were, the more they swooned, the more spiritually advanced they were, which is obviously not true. And so sometimes there's a time to pull back on emotion-inducing stimuli like music. And there's other times when you might use some of it for a while. And there's other times when you might be, have you listened to Indian religious music? Good God. I think it's all religious pretty much. And they have some music that will absolutely send you. So it depends on what's being done and to what end. And so, yes, teachers will, upon occasions, prescribe music. And for some people, it could be their whole path, because they're not. Well, I shouldn't say anything. I'm trying to think of an example. Well, Bach. That was his whole thing. And it shows.
Do you think Bach was an illuminate?
I don't know, but his music sometimes feels that way. I don't know. He was a hardcore family man, Christian, nose to the grindstone, hardworking guy. And his medium was music. And if you're going to judge him just by the music, you'd have to say this guy was pretty far along. But he was pretty obsessed too.
Yeah.
How many kids did he have?
How many?
I don't know. It doesn't matter.
I remember.
But the point is
that
that
6 or something.
It doesn't matter what Bach was or wasn't. His music that he left us is gift enough, I think. And it's all religious. Most of it's religious music.
Yeah.
So.
New question.
All right.
This one is from Teachings of Zen, Thomas Cleary's translation.
Mm-hmm. And selection.
Yes. The passage that I have a question about is on page 180 of the copy you have, called Two Tests.
Now, this text can be very difficult at parts and very straightforward at other parts. Two tests.
Yeah, my question is about the first paragraph there. The first paragraph is one test, and the second paragraph is another test of realization, basically, and understanding.
Okay, go ahead.
Um, well, I don't know if you want to read that first paragraph or not, but basically, in the paragraph, Yun Cheng, who's a 16th century teacher, Zen teacher, says that he tests students and others, teachers, by means of two methods. And one of them is testing people by writings, where he says that if you claim to be illuminated, uh, illumination means, well, one's own mind when illuminated is the Buddha mind. So you should be able to understand the teachings, the written teachings that emanate from that mind. So the scriptures that are supposedly written by Buddhas and such should be understood immediately without confusion.
Right.
And he tests people by that,
All right.
by their understanding.
Okay.
So my question is, and he starts off the thing by saying, I've tested people by means of two things and have never yet seen anyone pass through. When you wake up, I still think, I mean, unless if you're a savant at this, you probably would definitely fail the first test of writings, understanding the Buddha writings immediately. I mean, some of them you would understand definitely, a lot of them, but a lot of other ones would be very opaque.
But he's testing Buddhists here.
Yeah.
And so by the time they've made it there, I mean, certainly they would know this stuff. I would presume.
What do you mean? So
they've been studying the Buddha Dharma. They've read the Avatamsaka. They've read the Lotus Sutra. They've been immersed in this for a while.
So first I want to ask then is, because this comes up a lot, in these Zen selections that Cleary reads, you talk about how the people who show up, who are being spoken to by these masters,
Mm-hmm.
are already very saturated. Can you say a little bit about where they are? Are you talking about like for 10 years straight, they've been upholding precepts, they've been doing the sixfold path, they've been, or sorry, not the sixfold path, practicing the six paramitas, reading the scriptures repeatedly, like before they get to this, they go through intense preparation to where this is all second nature.
It's not intense. It's just serious. They're just serious. That's all. We keep putting the word intense. It's not intense. It's just natural. They just.
Sorry, I mean.
Yeah.
What I mean is thorough.
Yeah, if they're going to reach this stage, yeah. Not only that, they're familiar with koan. So this is the 17th century. 17th century?
16th, 17th century.
16th. So they've had 500 years minimum, probably more than that, of hermitages and zendos and state-sponsored Buddhism and all kinds of things. You know, and that these are the adventures in China, right? He's Chinese, so in China. Bodhidharma came there, around the 5th century, something like that, 4th or 5th century, and then starting in the 6th or 7th, Buddhism took off, and then some emperor made it the state religion, or something like that, and an empress had the Avatamsaka translated, and so they studied these scriptures, and that was just part of it. It'd be like us learning, I don't know, reading and writing and math, or something like that. Only parts of society were educated, but these guys were educated, I presume. I mean, there were some who were remarkably not educated, but historically, that's the legend. The 6th patriarch was supposed to be illiterate, but he was still fully illuminated, and so he had heard the scriptures. The other thing was people were reading these out loud all the time. Right? I was shocked to realize, I looked up, what did Homer write the Iliad on? I just thought to myself, what did Homer write the Iliad on? Because I don't think they had paper back then. And then I found out that he didn't write it down at all. He never wrote it. It was orally transmitted. Okay?
When was it first written?
They think about, I think around 700, 800 BC. But no one really knows. It's an oral tradition. A magnificent poem.
Yeah.
By the way, I recommend it. The Iliad, yeah. Definitely, at some point in life. It's something an old man can do, though. Now that we have the oral versions of them on recorded books. So with regard to the first test, yeah, it's a different time now. That's one part of it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not that hard to catch up. It's all translated into English now.
But he's saying nobody passes. He's never yet seen anyone pass through that test.
Yeah, people by the 17th century, people are getting really sloppy, or the 16th century, people are getting really sloppy and lazy, and they're more interested in appearances. And yeah, where's the Buddha Dharma gone? He's complaining. Everybody's turned into a slob.
You think that's hyperbole?
No. I think it may be true. I don't know. It's something to think about, though.
Mm-hmm.
And who knows what? Maybe he was maybe he was in some. I don't know enough about the man to be able to speculate, and even then, it's speculate. But what does it matter? I mean, these could be the exams in order to take over the abbacy or whatever it's called. Take over the what do they call it? The hermitage or wherever. You know, these are big organizations.
Yeah.
And they're about ready to collapse too. So you have to understand the times also. There was a lot going on in China at the time. And who knows exactly what he's referring to. So what's the real question? I lost the page number.
180. Well,
I don't know who Wan Cheng is sufficiently.
Mm-hmm.
What's, to me, far more interesting is the second test. If you are at peace, then even if every plant and tree in the world turned into a human being, each with infinite tongues and countless challenging questions of infinite complexity on every tongue, all posed simultaneously, it would only require a finger snap to answer them all. So this is advanced stuff. I wouldn't be concerned with that at this point, because it's this book is recommended only with reluctance, and it's really recommended to teachers of Zen primarily, and advanced students, I suppose. All right. Remember, there were a lot of charlatans, as there are now. As there is whenever there's real gold, there's going to be fake gold. And there's far more fake students than there are fake teachers, but there's plenty of both. Right? And back then there was political gain and social security, security in society by being affiliated at times. So it complicated it even more.
Mm-hmm.
All right, final question.
That's all I got for now.
All right, sir. Keep the faith, keep going. Those things that you do with your own initiative to try and understand these different aspects, the experiments, those things, just like that, that's the thing that's required. That's the thing that God smiles on. So that frog, he never would have seen the full moon. He never would have known the full moon coming straight down into that well, illuminating him and everyone around him, had he not been keeping his eye on the walls of the well when everybody else was asleep or not paying attention. Okay, sir?
Okay.
Take good care.
Thank you.
Ciao.